Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhern.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
The last time we talked about AI was in January, and you might think that's not long ago, but in AI years, that's like 6 years ago. Just before we started recording, I played Jeff some excerpts of a, air quotes here, podcast that was generated by Google's Notebook LM tool. What I did is I uploaded a draft page from my website for a service I'm going to start offering, and it was about 1,000 words, and I gave it nothing but that. And what Notebook LM does is it ingests what you give it, and then it gives you a podcast, two people discussing it. Mine was 11 minutes long, which is actually quite a lot for what it was, and it took the content on the webpage. I won't say what it's about yet. It's a service I'm going to be offering soon. But it took the content from my webpage, partly about me, but also it got content from the web. Now, we used to generative AI text making mistakes, what's called hallucinations. There was nothing wrong. Everything was correct, except it mispronounced my name. It said McElhern instead of McElhern. To be fair, the Irish do pronounce it McElhern and not McElhern. But this is leading into our discussion of AI today because, so much has changed since January. So much. On Apple's side, they finally admitted that everything they announced last year was a lie, or vaporware, which we were just discussing. Apple's not a vaporware company. They've not really come out and announced too many things that they didn't deliver. We're recording this on the 21st of May. Google yesterday had their Google I/O conference where they announced new AI tools and new AI apps and new AI agents and new AI APIs and new AI search tools and AI everything. It was like Google was all about AI. So we're mostly going to talk about photography here, but I think it's important to look around the edges of photography and see how much generative AI has made progress. Okay, 4 months since we last talked about it in January, but even go back a year, go back to 2 years, November 2022 when ChatGPT was released, and most people had never heard of this sort of thing before that. And all of a sudden, Google is putting AI in everything. Their Gemini AI is all over the place. Google has some image AI, both generative and image editing. You can't swing a cat without hitting AI these days in the computer world. So, Jeff, where do we start when we talk about AI in photography and particularly photo editing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the things that has struck me is, and I'll reference the Google I/O event specifically. We'll put some links and screenshots in the show notes. But it started off with an entirely AI generated video. Now I know I'm skipping straight to video instead of just photo, but the point here is that it was remarkably realistic looking. I'm not going to say it's perfect. I'm not going to say it's even remotely perfect. Like it still had that sort of AI slop look about it. But video especially, which, less than a year ago had problems with trying to keep objects consistent, like from frame to frame or scene to scene, that has...
And not giving people six fingers.
Not giving people six fingers. I think we are almost to the point where the whole six-finger joke is going to be completely irrelevant because obviously it was a problem and they've fixed it.
Didn't Google say that AI can now spell correctly in images when there's a text in an image?
It can actually not just spell things correctly, but keep a consistent font. And one of the examples that they used was it was like a dinosaur or something, and the words dino were in the top, and it gave it like a sort of dinosaur bone-shaped looking font. Like it was kind of creative in that way. So like in terms of just what generative AI can do for imagery is pretty spectacular. Now, does this mean that, oh no, it's now taken over, everything's so good that we're not going to be able to see anything that isn't actually created by a photographer, by a camera? Is it going to replace all this? Like, that's the same argument we've been having for a long time. And actually, like, a colleague of mine said, look, if you want to be creative, go out and create. Like, that's the way to do it. But, like, there's no denying that things have gotten much, much, much better. So in terms of like sort of catching us up here, a whole 4 months, 4 months later, which seems like it's been a very, very long time. Some things that stand out are the image quality, like I said. Lightroom has an interesting landscape masking feature, which is not generative, but it's using AI and machine learning in a very helpful way. Also, another thing that I wanted to point out from the Google event was they have a technology for basically embedding watermarks into AI-generated things so that you can tell that this was AI-generated, which seems really cool and seems more necessary. But then they sort of followed that up by, and the tool to use it mostly works. And so it's like, well, wait, if you're going to go to the trouble of doing this, and Adobe, they have their technology for marking something as being AI generated, which is good, but
it needs to work 100% of the time.
It needs to work 100% of the time, and it needs to be able to be something that is surfaced immediately, so that when you're scrolling Instagram and you see something and you're like, oh my God, that's the most beautiful picture of a whale breaching in a lagoon. You're like, wait, a whale would not be in a lagoon. And there should be something there that automatically says, hey, this is AI generated.
I want to push back on something you said before, though. At the beginning of the Google presentation, you said it was still looked a bit like AI slop. I disagree. It looked a lot like quality animated films. It wasn't perfect. It was, I would say, the aesthetics were AI sloppish, like throwing in three-dimensional emojis next to, realistic-looking animals. I think slop is a bit of an exaggeration. And hey, let's not forget, Apple has Image Playground. So, the bar is really high here.
Well, okay, so that's actually a really good point, because the video that they had, that they started it off with was very clearly, professionally done, tailored, edited. We don't know like what the prompts were, like how that was created. It looked like a lot of work had been put into it. A little bit later on, they had an example that was a somewhat live example where they were demonstrating the technology is called VO3 now, which is also part of they're also calling it Flow. Like, I think Flow is a mixture of things. I don't know. Google is crazy about their names. Anyway, and it was a video of like an old man driving a convertible car with a giant owl, I think, in the back, and driving it off a cliff, and the owl is supposed to like lift up its arms and it becomes a flying car. And so this was something that was more actively generated without all the finessing that I think the original video got. And that was much more sloppy. Like, it just had lots of different artifacts, and it was just sort of weird. So, we're not going to be at that point where you're just going to type something in, it's going to be perfect, and boom. But we're a lot closer. And, in terms of the sloppiness of it, look at what was going on last year and the year before, and it's just vast quantities
the improvements
of
are
improvement.
exponential.
Yes.
And worrisome, because we're going to be getting photorealistic AI-generated video in the next couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
And it will be hard to distinguish from reality. And this is a big problem for politics and society.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the same is true for photos. I think we're already to the stage where AI-generated photos could look real enough to fool people.
They absolutely do. Yeah. Yeah. So, where does that put us as photographers? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I said to you before the show, we've been using these tools for years in photo editing apps. They weren't called AI, they were called machine learning. One of the tools that I use regularly is what's the general word when you blow up the resolution? Super resolution.
Super resolution, yeah.
Often in articles when I have screenshots and or images or icons, and the only thing I can find is low resolution, I bounce it into an app like Pixelmator or Acorn. I use a super resolution to blow it up, and it's fine for what I need. This isn't for photographs, but you could do it with old photographs. Take some of those old 1 megapixel photographs and blow them up. We talked about this, a year or so ago, going back at really old photos. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of options now that we didn't have before. I think the most interesting ones, though, are, and we've already talked about, I think in January, we talked about the tools to remove things from photos. And Apple's cleanup tool is very good, and Adobe has that as well. Apple doesn't yet have a generative fill, so that would be the kind of thing you want to expand a photo and have the AI create what's around it, and Adobe does have that. Mm-hmm. So you were mentioning that Lightroom has a new AI landscape masking. How does this work, and why would you use this?
Yeah. So, and actually, I want to make the point right before I get into that is this is a good delineation between tools that are using AI to be useful and tools that are just generating things. I'm finding that the things to be useful are more and more useful. And this is an example of machine learning, but we're just going to slap AI on everything because that's just the way things are now. But in this case, what Lightroom has done, so we've talked about Lightroom masking in the past, and basically it's Lightroom can look at an image, figure out what's there, and then take actions like, that's a person. And so I can select that as that person and then make color and light changes just on the person or just on the sky. So what they added in the most recent update was a landscape version of this. And what that will do is it will break out areas of a landscape that you might want to work on. So instead of making a sky mask and then working on that, you basically choose the landscape masking, and it will give you different categories of what it can find.
You mentioned the sky. Now, apps have been doing sky replacement for a while. I remember Luminar, one of the early Luminar versions, about 12 versions ago, 2 years ago, because they come out with so many versions, had, a library of skies you could replace, and it would select the sky. And I guess selecting the sky is relatively easy, right? It's trying to find that line between the horizon and the sky. Everything above is the sky, and everything below is the rest of the image. And that's not too difficult. And I'm looking on the Adobe masking tool tutorial, and it's talking about select sky, so it's not that hard. But what's more difficult is an image that they show of a woman with a big sort of frizzy afro, and that it's selecting the woman and her hair. And that's the real test of masking, isn't it? Selecting someone and their hair. Yeah.
Especially, that's a great example of hair because it's really difficult hair. In this example that we'll put a screenshot in the show notes. To quickly describe, this is a photo of a lighthouse. There's a cloudy sky in the background. On the left is water, and on the right, where the lighthouse is, you have got some rocky areas basically just on the shore here. And so what I've done is I've created a new landscape mask, and it gives me these options so that it can, in this case, it's pulled out the sky as a possibility, mountains, which is not accurate. It's basically the ground, but because they're sort of mountain shape. Yeah, exactly. But there's also an option
if this was taken far away, that's what mountains would look like.
Absolutely, yeah. And it has an option for architecture. So this will select only the lighthouse, and there's like a little, outbuilding or monument base next to it, and then water. And so I can select these and create 4 separate masks.
And it's Lightroom that's figuring out those 4 different types of content. You didn't say that there's a lighthouse, sky, mountains, and water. It was Lightroom who figured this out.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this way I can then go into my masks and say, all right, I only want to make the lighthouse just needs to be maybe a little bit brighter, or the water, I want to make it a little bit smoother looking. So I can, for example, change the texture of that. or maybe make the highlights in the water a little bit brighter, that sort of thing. So instead of having to make manual masks or make like radial gradients and things like that, it is grabbing those things for me.
Well, you couldn't do this with radial gradients. I mean, it's selecting. You'll look in the show notes, please, because you're seeing the water. I guess this was a slightly long exposure, and you're seeing the fingers of the water coming over the rocks or mountains or whatever. You can't select this any other. I mean, okay, you could select it pixel by pixel in Photoshop the way people used to do it. But the fact that you can do this with a couple of clicks, this is revolutionary. Because you've picked a photo that's particularly difficult here.
Of course I did, yes, because that would be the point. I mean, like you could do this, say, a couple of months ago to do this exact same thing. You could do it either by using like a brush mask, so you're actually just painting the areas, or you could use a luminance mask to just select like the brightest areas. But what this is allowing me to do is skip all of that. So it's like an improvement on top of an improvement. And it just says, all right, this must be the water. And it knows that it's the water. And then I can just get right to editing that. In other images, it will pick out things like if you have like maybe grass and you have sidewalks that are bisecting it, it'll treat those as two different things. It'll be like I think it calls it like natural ground and man-made ground or something like that. So there are a whole bunch of different categories of things that it's picking up from, any sort of scene that you're going to throw at it, which, like you said, like in terms of editing and saving yourself some time, that is revolutionary.
It's not even saving time. You would not be able to do this. You would not be able to select the water manually.
You could with a lot of effort.
The sky is relatively easy, but the water is not, the way the water is going over the rocks.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And selecting the buildings relatively easy as well. But this is really, I'm impressed. Now, go ahead, do something with the sky. Make it look, select the sky and...
I'll make it more dramatic.
Make it dramatic, more contrast,
bring the exposure
darken
way
it
down. Yeah, exactly. And again, this is all I'm doing is just now manipulating the sliders for exposure and blacks and texture and things like that.
Okay, now can you zoom in around the lighthouse? Because now Jeff is sharing his screen through Zoom, so it's not great. You can see a halo between the lighthouse and the sky, so it's not perfect yet.
And also, because I have made the sky quite a bit darker, I think some of that is why this is apparent.
Yeah.
And there is a trick, if I remember, like I could make the sky mask and create a new one and invert it, and I think that like helps with halos. There is a trick. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but yes, I could also go in and just take a brush and add that to this too. So just for like these little edges here, make a tiny thing, and then that would, in theory, add to it. But then that gets really finicky. But it means that even if you do have some finicky work to do, you're doing just a little bit at the end. You're not. Your entire thing isn't finicky.
It's doing most of the work for you.
Yeah. So that's, super useful, very practical, and I'm not generating anything here. It's just letting me do something and work with different parts of things also that I didn't have to then send to Photoshop. Because before, this would be a thing to send to Photoshop.
Right.
So now I can just do this in Lightroom and not have to deal with, all right, now I'm going to send it to Photoshop and it's going to create a bunch of layers, and like that is a whole other workflow that I honestly, like I could do, but I don't really want to.
Didn't Adobe just announce that the pricing for this is going up like a lot?
Oh, I'm sure they did. I saw something about it, although I thought
like
that was
$800 a year or something?
I think that's for the like the all apps plan, or maybe there's like a pro plan. I'm not sure.
the one that would give you the most access to generative AI, because this does cost money.
It does cost money. And in fact, I think Adobe is now, every time you use generative AI, it's like taking a token or a I can't remember how they're saying, like you get a certain number of credits for use, and then after that you can buy more credits, or it becomes slower, or you know, because you're right, like all this stuff that we're doing, it is expensive on the other end, and you know, they have to pay for it somehow. And
it's Adobe, so they're going to make you pay for it over and over and over. Absolutely. And they're going to lock you in for the rest of your life. This is impressive, though. This is, I mean, we need to show before and after in the show notes, but the difference between this photo now and what you had before, and the ability to select things like that,
You were speechless. You need to, like, I don't know.
Well, I'm never speechless. I always have something to say, but I didn't realize it could.
You were speechless for a minute, and I was also almost going to suggest that maybe you need to like throw this into your Notebook LM and create another podcast inside the podcast. And now I've gone full Ouroboros.
Maybe what I need to do is, when I finished editing this podcast, generate a transcript and put that into Notebook LM and see what it returns. But see, what Notebook LM would do is it would summarize the podcast.
Yeah.
It won't just repeat the podcast, but it'll summarize it so you can hear the gist of it in 10 minutes or whatever. Again, I don't know what the options are. My thing was 11 minutes, which seems long for what it was. I didn't see any options on the surface that allow you to adjust, you know, detailed or not detailed. But yeah, this is where we're going.
Yeah.
For example, for some of my podcasts, I've been using Otter, which is an online transcription service. And it's quite good. It's not perfect, but it's quite good. And I've now I've been using an app called Mac Whisper since it was first released. And it's finally gotten to the level where it's almost as good as Otter. And I bought Mac Whisper early on for like 19 euros, and now it's like 59 euros because the guys added a whole bunch of things. I won't be renewing my Otter subscription when it runs out, because Mac Whisper can do it on my Mac. It can do a 30-minute podcast in about 7 or 8 minutes, and the quality is almost as good. So another thing is that these tools, you're getting more and more of these free tools or tools you can run on your computer for things like this.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going in the years to come. I think a lot of Google's AI on Android is going to be on device. And this was Apple's goal with this new Siri, was to do as much of it as possible on device. And as these models are becoming more efficient and need less processing power, it makes sense to not offload them and to create them on device. I mean, with Apple's Image Playground, I think everything is done on your device. I don't think it's sent out anywhere. Of course, Apple's Image Playground is, what's the word? Shite, as we say here. I mean, it makes comical images that are like so bad. And with Apple's annual upgrade cycle and not being able to, you know, improve on this, or at least not telling anyone they're improving on it, it's going to be shite until the fall. It's almost laughable when you look at what Apple's doing in images compared to other companies. But Apple's cleanup in photos is quite good.
It's mostly good.
I would like to see some improvements. I would hope that, June 9th, the Worldwide Developers Conference, Apple will be announcing some improvements to these tools. If they don't have improvements to AI, they might as well just go back and, you know, release a Newton again or something. But photos, actually a low-hanging fruit, right? Photos, because cleanup tools and generative AI tools are not that complicated. Now, Apple won't have something like this sort of masking because it doesn't exist in Apple Photos, but they can have other AI-generated tools like generative fill and expanding things outside the frame, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and also remember they bought Pixelmator and Photomator, so it'll be interesting to see. So
maybe they're going to roll
how much
the
of that
powerful
stuff
features.
gets rolled in.
Yeah. Because Pixelmator and Photomator already had some good AI tools, and so the question is, will Apple roll everything into Photos, or my prediction, Photos and Photos Pro?
That would be interesting to see.
Because I don't think they want to not have Photos anymore because it's their app.
Yeah. This brings me to another quick point, which is also that not all of these tools are the same. So, for example, and I am not trying to just slag on a company. This is just what I observed. So, another thing that happened this week is that Skylum, who makes the app Luminar, they have a Luminar mobile app for the phone, for iPhone, that's been out for about a year, and they announced an Android version of it that works on Android and Chrome OS. Okay, great. It's a quirky photo app. Honestly, it gives me vibes of the old Kai's Power Tools because they're just going a little bit crazy with the interface elements.
Showing your age there.
I know.
I'll try and
know.
We need to try and find a link to put in the show notes because particularly the interface of that thing was just
the
weird.
Interface. Yeah. And, it's not nearly that bad, but it definitely is very non-standard. But I was playing around with it, and part of the things that it can do, so Luminar is very AI-based. And so it has, like on the phone, you can do a sky replacement pretty easily, and you can relight images pretty easily. And so that's super cool. I just tried to do a little bit of smart replacing, just like there was a electrical tower in the background of an image. And that seems like table stakes now, and it could not do it. And this was literally like a small tower against a cloudy background. It wasn't even like I was trying to do a complicated scene. And every single time I ran it, you could very clearly see the edges of where my selection was. So,
was this the Android version?
This was actually on the iPhone that I saw this.
And you have a powerful iPhone.
Yeah, I have the iPhone 16 Pro. So It's important to also understand that just because an app or a company offers this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. And I think that's where, Adobe certainly has a definite advantage in this. And I think some of the stuff that Google is doing is now getting to be better. And it's not a universal thing. You really have to
Yeah, AI doesn't mean that it's necessarily great.
Exactly, yeah.
The Adobe landscape masking that you were doing before, is that being done on your Mac? Or is that being sent to Adobe's cloud? Do you know?
That is a good question. I believe okay. I'm going to say it's probably being done in the cloud because
it was pretty fast.
It was pretty fast. Adobe has been... Well, no, that's a very good question. So I was doing that in Lightroom Classic. So actually, it may have been doing it on device. My hesitation here is that a lot of the stuff, specifically in Lightroom Desktop, is very cloud-based. And so it will send things to the cloud. But for example, in Photoshop, there are some selection things that are done on device, but you can choose to have it done in the cloud. There's like a little toggle that will give you a better result because it can basically have unlimited processing power to resolve what's in your image.
Right.
So that was a very long answer to a very easy question, which I think
because you didn't know the answer.
Because I didn't know the answer.
Look it up, but you'll look it up and you'll put something in the show notes if you can find an answer.
Sure, let's do that. That's a good idea.
Do we want to do snapshots?
I have a snapshot. I can do a snapshot if you want to do a snapshot. So my snapshot is something kind of absurd but useful, which is always a fun thing. So I bought, all right, very short story about this. My kid was taking the SAT, which is, like pre-college, high school testing, et cetera. And part of that was having a laptop that could last for the entirety of the test. And the laptop was like a Chromebook provided by the school, which you'll not be surprised to learn has horrible battery life. It's a piece of crap. It's, lowest common denominator. But there was no guarantee that there would be like a plug nearby or whatever. So I bought this honkin' Anchor power brick, right?
That is the size of an actual red brick.
That is the size of an actual red brick. It's heavy. It's got a little screen on it, but this will power a laptop. And honestly, it's been keeping my laptop here powered while we've been doing this, which is, doing Zoom, doing Lightroom. Like, that's pretty computationally demanding. And so it was about $100, and it's not something I'm going to carry in my bag all the time, but it also has 2 USB-C ports, 1 USB-A port, and will power a bunch of different things at once. So like this would be a good thing to take on maybe a backpacking, well, maybe not a backpacking trip because it's heavy, but if you need the power, it's actually quite useful.
Impressive.
Link in the show notes. What do you have this week?
I'm going to choose some music, and this is something I just got. It is a box set of collected works by Steve Reich. Steve Reich is a New York minimalist composer. He is one of the first 2 composers, along with Philip Glass, who made minimalist music, so this is repetitive music, become very popular. I've been listening to Steve Reich's music since the 70s. I saw his ensemble perform live many times in New York in a variety of venues, and I love this music. He just turned 88, and None Such Records released this box set of 27 CDs, which is almost all of his works. There are some that aren't there. The reason I'm mentioning this is it's good music for photo editing. Steve Reich's early work involved phasing, where 2 instruments would play rhythms that would sort of drift apart and then come back together. And then most of his work involves pulsing, music that's repetitive, boom, 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 not like dance music. Very creative music. It's the kind of thing that is really good when you're concentrating on something because the rhythm can help refine your concentration. So it's Steve Reich's collected works on None Such Records.
Cool. And I forgot to mention that my thing is called an Anker 737 power bank.
Ooh, sounds like an airplane.
It does sound, it's about as heavy as an airplane, yes.
So in our next episode, we'll talk about what Apple presents at the Worldwide Developer Conference. Their presentation is on June 9th, and our next episode comes out on the 13th. So we will be able to talk about all of the amazing AI tools that Apple presents, including the improvements to Image Playground. Until next time.
Everything's going to be great. They're going to fix everything.
Everything's going to be magical, not great.
Magical, yes.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's PhotoActiveCast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.